BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going back to the year 1985 to discuss a case that we've never mentioned before on this channel. How I got into it was, I mentioned earlier in October that I was watching the show The Act about Gypsy Rose Blanchard, and we did a couple uploads on that one, but that's only available on Hulu, so I was signed up for that sort of free trial on Hulu for 30 days. Yesterday I tried to cancel it, but they told me that I'm already stuck paying for the next month, so I decided to keep it, and I was just like, let's see what's on Hulu, and one of the first things that came up was this thing called Killing for Love, which is a crime documentary from 2016. I had no idea really what it was about, but it sounded like it had an interesting description, so I decided to turn it on. Now, this is the story of two individuals. One is named Elizabeth, and the other is named Jens. Elizabeth is a Canadian citizen, and when she was first talking in the documentary, I was like, oh, wait, is she British? But then I began to listen more closely, and I was like, oh no, maybe she's not, she's just soft-spoken. But as we mentioned, she was Canadian, but she had been raised in Europe and in England, and she had gone to boarding school in Switzerland as well as in various parts of England. So she has somewhat of an accent. And of course, Jens was from Germany. He was a scholarship student at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Jens was also the son of a German diplomat, and he was not only in the country on a diplomatic passport, but also on a diplomatic visa as well. He was actually born in Thailand, and he had a lot of connections to that particular country. But is this just an international romance? Of course not. As we mentioned, there is a sort of crime that's going on. And I think one of the reasons why this thing came to the top of my sort of Hulu search is because I had been watching The Act, which is all about Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her boyfriend Nick Godejohn, who committed the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard, Gypsy Rose's mother. And now we're talking about Elizabeth Haysom and her boyfriend Jens Suring, who were involved in what? The murder of Elizabeth Haysom's mother and father. In short, a double homicide took place in 1985, and then an enormous amount of questions just erupted as to who had done it, because a lot of things kind of went down. You have these two people, Elizabeth Haysom and Jens Suring. They fled the country, and if I recall correctly, in all the things that I had been reading, like the sort of supplemental articles to this documentary, Killing for Love, it said that they fled to England. But if I recall what Jens said in the documentary, that at first they went to Thailand to get fake IDs or something. I might have misheard that because it goes back and forth. It's like he talks in German for the documentary, and the German title was Das Versprechen, which is, I guess, like the promise. And I was like, if he's fluent in English, why is he responding in German? But I guess they wanted to make the film marketable to both the German audience and the English-speaking audience because it premiered at the Munich Film Festival. But aside from that, I think they first went to Thailand to get fake documents and fake IDs, and then they went to England, and they were busted for writing fake checks, and eventually the sort of forensic chain of events brought them back to the murders of Elizabeth Haysom's parents. Enormous similarities, though, with the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her boyfriend Nick Godejohn. You have parents that were potentially abusive and most definitely controlling and dominating their daughter's life. So what was this story going to be? She kind of brainwashed another kind of young, naive gentleman into committing the murders of her parents so she could have her freedom? Is that what's going on? At first, I thought that's exactly what was going to happen, but then a twist. It turns out, though, that Jens Suring confessed multiple times to these murders, and he said that he was involved with this, he said that he had done it, but then he retracts the confession, saying he did not commit the murders. All he did was provide some sort of alibi for Elizabeth Haysom, and the reason why he confessed is because, as we mentioned, diplomatic visa, diplomatic passport. He thought that he would have had diplomatic immunity from the whole thing. And the murder was actually committed by somebody with the name of James Farmer, who was a kind of drug dealer that was involved with Elizabeth Haysom. She was also tied into drugs. So it's like, then it's just kind of thrown into this giant whodunit, and like the reason why it's called Killing for Love is the sort of taglines and movie descriptions. If you're ever to Google this, it would just talk about why on earth would somebody confess to a murder that they didn't commit. And they show you some photos of this as they kind of introduce the film. Lots of just gore and a very, very vicious killing. And it's just like, why would somebody confess to that if they didn't do it? Well, Jens Søring changed his story and said it was only because of the diplomatic immunity issue. He thought that he would not be charged for it. But there is a big thing, that he believed eventually that he would be reunited with Elizabeth Haysom, that they would be together. He was about 18 when they first met, and she was 20. And I was an 18-year-old once, 19, 20, 21, all of that. I'm fully aware that men sometimes make poor decisions when they are in their younger years. That I can comprehend, even if it seems absolutely illogical and implausible, and you might be thinking, what on earth, why would somebody ever do something like that? I was just saying, I can comprehend why a guy would do some things like that when he was 18, 19, or 20 years old. Yeah. Okay, but to digress from that, I think that this is kind of like, there's a much more valuable point that we have to discuss here, and that is the concept of psychological manipulation. We've been seeing this so many times in true crime cases. We mentioned the incident with Gypsy Rose Blanchard getting her boyfriend Nick Godejohn to murder her mother, but how many times have we seen examples of psychological manipulation where someone is not the murderer? They do not want to commit the crime, but they want someone else to commit the crime as well. And it doesn't even have to be murder. Just last week on this channel, we were talking about the case of In Young-yu, the South Korean international student that kind of manipulated her boyfriend into committing suicide, and she's actually going to be charged with involuntary manslaughter. If she ever gets back to the United States, she'll face trial, because, she psychologically manipulated him into committing that act with 47,000 text messages related to just domination and the possibility of him committing suicide. So you see, though, this is something that should not be underestimated. And in the articles about In Young-yu, they said she had her boyfriend under complete psychological control. Now, it's like, this is something that just happens from time to time in the true crime world. We also have to be aware of perhaps some more famous examples. What about Charles Manson? Someone who was serving life in prison, died in prison, and the things that he was accused of were not committing the murders. The Manson family was that he was the manipulative, orchestrating force that got everybody around this very destructive and heinous cause. So it's like, this is one of the things, though, that should not be taken lightly. And just because somebody is not pulling the trigger, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are completely innocent. And in many cases, though, people do often get kind of convicted on certain things if they are just kind of involved with something. And that's exactly what we saw with Elizabeth Haysom here. She was convicted for being an accessory to murder before the fact, like as opposed to, like after the fact, somebody would help, cover things up, or if a convict is on the run and they kind of give them shelter, that's after the fact. She was convicted as being an accessory to this crime before the fact, given 45 years for each of the murders. That's for both of her parents, so meaning that she was supposed to serve 90 years in jail. But even on Wikipedia, it says that she will be released from prison in 2032 when she is 68 years old, so she will be getting out early. And it doesn't seem like anything like that is going to be happening for Jens Søring, which is kind of just a twisted story. And I would say about this case is just that there are just a lot of elements that are going on. There are a lot of elements and patterns that we see. But with some of the things, though, that they mentioned, though, in this documentary, Killing for Love, is that they brought up a clip from Larry King Live, and he's talking about how this case gets bizarrer and bizarrer. I thought the word was more bizarre or something, but I kind of like the way he said it, bizarre and bizarre. And some of the things that Elizabeth Haysom's parents would do to her would be that if she wanted to have kind of social interactions at like a party or something, the chauffeur would drop her off, she would have 30 minutes, and then the chauffeur would take her back home. Very controlling and manipulative parents, and some people do not respond well to things like that. And other people do not respond well to just the concept of domination. And, I mean, I really hate to just keep dwelling dwelling on the parallels between this and the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, but it's almost just like the same thing that's kind of going on. They think that the only way out of this situation is murder, which it most definitely is not. I mean, and some people even talked about this with the case of Jennifer Pan, and we did an upload about that called The Tiger Parent Murders, where this girl just felt like she was so controlled by her parents that the only way out was to murder them. And so many times people are wondering, it's just like, why didn't she just leave? And in the case of Jennifer Pan, you see this very clearly as well. I mean, like, she staged a sort of home break-in and a burglary and an attack, and they even had her kind of like tied up to the banister or something, where while some people were trying to kill both of her parents, they successfully killed Jennifer Pan's mother, but not her father. Her father survived and was able to give his events of the story, and that's actually what kind of led to the truth coming out. And they believe that if he hadn't survived, that the truth would have never come out, and the truth never would have been known to the world. Maybe some things could be said for the case of Elizabeth Haysom. But what I would say about this one is that this is really just one where the kind of crime was completely unnecessary. There was no passion or provocation like that. There was no kind of gross sort of cycle of destructive behaviors that she was trying to experience. Because if you do look at somebody like Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who was the victim of Munchausen by proxy syndrome, someone who was being forced to sit in a wheelchair when she didn't need it, someone who was being forced to pretend that she had cancer and muscular dystrophy when she didn't need it, that level of abuse is not quite present. But the way that they introduced this film, Killing for Love, is that they talked about something else that is horribly neglected in the true crime world, and that is the case of mothers abusing their children. They're kind of starting out talking about some things about Elizabeth Haysom. This is just the absolute introduction to the film, and if you ever want to see it, this is called Killing for Love. Maybe you've seen it in the past if you clicked on this link. And the thing is that they're saying that she was sexually abused by her mother. And the therapist who has turned YouTuber, Daniel Mackler, has a very good video out there about children who are sexually abused by their mothers. And I believe it's actually talking about sons specifically, but this would be the case of a daughter. Now, all I have to say about that is, I've been watching Steve Wilkos for nearly a decade. The Steve Wilkos Show, I'm a big fan of it. I watch the episodes now on Instagram if they put them up for like the 9-minute ones. They also got some new things up on YouTube. I was watching the Instagram ones, but they took a lot of it down. And the thing is, though, there have been countless cases over the last 9 years of children who have become the victim of molestation by their mothers. There was even this incident of a woman who had been imprisoned for molesting her daughter, and an Akron law professor and 7 students in his law class kind of re-examined her case, and they found that there was insufficient evidence, and they released her, and she went on the show to clear her name, and she failed the lie detector test. Apparently, she did molest her daughter, but I mean, I put a lot more stock in lie detector results than a lot of other people do. But the thing is, though, there is no kind of boundary that we can draw when it comes to things like molestation and abusive behavior toward children. Men do it and women do it. Fathers do it and mothers do it. There is no boundary. I just think different people are somewhat better at concealing it. And apparently this is how they introduced the film regarding Elizabeth Haysom. But one of the things, though, that I would just sort of say about that is, we do tend to see a little bit more aggression in young males as opposed to young females. Like, boys will definitely tend to be somewhat more physically aggressive and more involved with play fighting. Apparently, I definitely wasn't much into that back when I was a kid, unless it was like some sort of kind of role-playing thing. All right, let's pretend to be like vampire bats and start, smacking each other around. Very little, though. Like, absolutely not. I mean, like, very little. But once again, the majority of boys tend to show a little bit more aggressive behavior, and the majority of males tend to show a little bit more aggressive behavior. But in terms of abuse, I mean, abuse is going to be something that is going to be coming from mothers and fathers. But I do believe that our culture does neglect that to a certain point. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, anyone can be abusive, and also anyone can be the orchestrator of a murder and the kind of psychological manipulator, whether it's Gypsy Rose Blanchard or In Young Yu or Charles Manson or Elizabeth Haysom. Anyone can do that, male or female. Crime knows no boundaries, and that's just one of the ways that we have to look at it. Well, as you see, this is part one. We're going to be continuing a discussion on this very soon, but I would also just like to ask the challenge question. I mentioned that I found this just by clicking on a kind of recommended documentary film. What is one crime documentary that you would really like to recommend to people? And maybe we can have a bit of a discussion on that. That would be our challenge question for the day. And until next time.